Hello, and thank you for joining us for what is the fifth and final installment in the Unreal Engine for Architectural Design and Visualization webinar series. Fear not, we have more webinar series scheduled for the upcoming new year so we can continue to serve up all the great info you're so hungry for. If you haven't guessed, I am not Chris Murray. Chris was unable to join us today due to a scheduling conflict, but will return for future webinars. I'm Eddie Perlberg, and some of you may know me from my numerous talks and webinars from places like Autodesk University or SIGGRAPH, maybe the National Association of Broadcasters or NAB conferences, or a whole lot more. I've been an advocate and evangelist for design visualization and 3ds Max for many, many years. It is my honor and privilege to be joined today by Fabrice Borelli. So he'll be taking us through and introducing us to the VR workflow in Unreal. For those of you who are new to the webinar series, you might be asking yourself, well, why Unreal? Well, it may be because of our legacy. With 18 years as a premium award-winning real-time engine, we are the industry standard for which many are compared when it comes to quality and realism. We have an enterprise team worldwide working on exactly your issues and focusing on solving the types of things that you'll encounter in your work with design visualization and design. We're everywhere with over 3 million users worldwide, and best of all, we're free. So free versions include the full tool set. Everything you see in today's webinar will be presented in that free tool, so you can download and start creating and presenting to your heart's content. So like I said, this is number 5 in a 5 webinar series, obviously 1 through 4 before that, including the introduction to Datasmith, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, it's important to understand that you do not need to have seen those in order to enjoy today's webinar, but I certainly do encourage you to go back if you haven't seen them and or revisit them, as they are a gold mine of great information. Today's webinar is on VR production, and coming soon we will have more in the Unreal webinar series for product design and manufacturing. And while this may not be your area of focus, again, a lot of great information is presented in this webinar series as well. And like I said, coming up, new series in the architectural and design visualization webinars. So stay tuned for those. So we talked about Datasmith. What is Datasmith? For those of you who aren't familiar, it is a plugin for the Unreal Engine that allows you to bring in design visualization and CAD data directly into the engine without fidelity loss or additional complexity. Now, this is an open beta, and you can sign up for it now by visiting us at unrealengine.com/beta. The response has been overwhelming, so please be patient as we fulfill all of the beta requests that we have gotten in. Here's a quick example of how the Datasmith plugin actually works. This time using 3ds Max for the example. You can see that texture maps, material shaders, geometry, lighting, and cameras all going through the Datasmith plugin come directly into the Unreal Engine with little or no manipulation or loss. So the fidelity is maintained, and this continues for many, many design applications, and the list of those applications continues to grow. So as we continue to develop the Datasmith plugin, so will its ability and the number of applications that it supports also grow. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. So like I said, during the course of the presentation, we'll share the links to those other installments in the series. So don't be distracted by trying to Google them now or trying to find them. We'll post those as a sticky note in the web chat. Portions of today's presentation have been pre-recorded, so I can assure you Fabrice and I are here to answer your questions and to make sure everything runs smoothly. Now, speaking of questions in the chat rooms and polls, please be respectful. We are all artists and professionals here, and we want to make sure that we continue to present these in the professional manner that we've grown accustomed. So we rely on you to also maintain that level of respect. When submitting a question, please use the question button, and you access that with the chat pull down. Now, there's a flurry of activity already in the chat room, so you can imagine that questions might fly by without our even seeing them. So by using the QA button, when you submit your question, that will bring it up into a special area of our interface so that we'll make sure that we can see them. Now, like I said, we're going to be answering questions during the presentation, but some might require extended explanation or may just be great for group discussion. So we'll save those to the Q&A section at the end. Others may require additional information or resources, so we'll capture your email address and make sure we get to you after the webinar. Now, speaking of after the webinar, you'll receive an email with links to the replay. So be sure to sit back, enjoy today's webinar as we present it, and then go back at any time and watch it again and pick up on the subtle details of some of the things that Fabrice is going to be showing. And more importantly, be sure to fill out the survey. We want to make sure that we're hitting all the right notes for you as we continue on with these webinar series. So be sure to fill that out, and I thank you in advance for doing that. But now on to the show. So let me introduce to you Fabrice Borelli, a well-known architect and visualization artist. His clients include Thomas Heatherwick, including Google, Nike, Bentley, the International Olympic Committee, and a whole lot more. You can visit him at fabriceborelli.com, where he has a number of great resources for you, including links to some of his e-courses just released. Lighting in the Unreal Engine. So you can imagine when you see Fabrice's work today, this is a resource that you're definitely going to want to tap into. So without further ado, please let me introduce to you Fabrice Borelli. Fabrice, take it away.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you, Eddie. Welcome to this architectural visualization webinar number 5 about virtual reality. We are going to talk about a lot of things today, so make yourselves comfortable and let's see what we are going to talk about. To start with, we're going to have a quick overview of the hardware, what's needed, the head-mounted displays themselves, the goggles. Then we're going to look at the interface in Unreal Engine and see what is made already available to us in terms of VR template, and the VR scene, and just explore a little bit what we've got to work with here. Then we are going to have a look at this Blade Runner scene, a little story behind, and then we'll set up the VR that we've seen before in this scene, and finally we'll have a look at how we can extend that a little bit, use the controllers with the blueprints, and I'll show you a little bit, point you to some resources for the light functions and then the lighting as well. Great, so plenty to talk about, plenty to look at, so let's get cracking. So in terms of hardware, we're going to need, obviously, on top of our computer, the head-mounted displays, the goggles, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the big investment is going to be today in the GPU, not massively in the processor. We're not going to spend hours and hours rendering like we do, but we are going to push the GPU, the graphic processing unit, very, very hard. So what we're talking about really is 2K screens at 90 frames a second. That's the recommended frame rate, and 2K screens. We're asking a lot of our video cards. So if we are adding animations, large textures, and so on, we're also going to demand a lot of memory from our graphics card. So that's why I've just sort of put this table here, more or less because it had the video card of my dreams, the 1080 Ti, which has a lot of RAM, 11 gigabytes, and it's got 3,500 cores, which is pretty unbelievable. It's like having a supercomputer on board. And of course, we will be loading a lot of geometry as much as we can, and these things take a lot of memory, so we'll need a lot of RAM. So as usual, technical recommendations go as much as your budget will stretch. But to restate that the investment is going to be in the graphics card. With regards to the head-mounted display here, we're really considering either of these two, the Oculus and the Vive. They're both very, very good, well, top of the range between the Oculus and the Vive. I've tried both of them. Here I'm using the Vive, and currently the Vive is the pro system. I think the interface that we're going to look at in a minute in VR in Unreal has definitely been designed with the Vive. It works very very smoothly there. The room scale is very accurate. The controllers are very accurate because the base stations, the sensors, are plugged in. So it is the industry standard, and I find the way the headband rests around my head very comfortable, and I feel I could sort of be in there for a long time. So it's very sturdy, very solid, and I think if you were to have definitely a dedicated room, this would be very much the choice in an office, for example. The Oculus is more geared towards the general public, obviously it being owned by Facebook. They have got the Facebook ecosystem, which you will need to go through before you launch the app. So it's a little bit of a branding issue, but the controllers are very, very good. I've used it on site, so it's very portable. It's very easy to set up with my laptop. Client was very happy. And the design looks cool. I think it's a little bit more minimal. I really like the controllers, the way it's pressure sensitive, so you can half open your hand, and it works very well with the different fingers you can point. And so, but this is all a little bit theoretical right now. We don't really have the need. So my recommendation would be to, if you want something that's more portable to be able to take to your clients, there's an elegant case with the Oculus as well. The Vive is definitely for a more permanent, stable sort of solution that's not going to move. All right, so let's move on. Let's have a look at some of the VR. So here I am. I've just jumped straight into the interface. My Oculus is set up and ready to go. And I've loaded a completely empty scene here, and I'm just going to go to File and create a new level. And you see we've got the option to go to select this VR basic level here. So let's click on that, and let's explore what we can do with this VR mode, which you will have if you have the goggles installed. So I'll just click on this, and I'll put my goggles on and grab my controllers, and so now I'm in the scene, and with the side buttons here I'm able to kind of zoom out and zoom in the scene this way, and kind of change the scale of the scene, which is really, really interesting. With this kind of flowing laser here, I'm able to select objects, and then they have this little handle that I can use to move them around, or also I could just grab an object and move it around freely, which is very very liberating. It also kind of seems to snap to a grid here, which is really really useful for the future. So this ability to zoom out and I'll demonstrate a little bit more of that in the scene in a minute. But now we also have the ability to use the interface using this thumbstick here, so which enables it works very well. It's very intuitive. Something that maybe is not so much with the Oculus. I find the thumbstick is a bit awkward. So here I'm actually able to access all the features of the interface, and with these windows, and so I can open and close them and have access to all the things that I would normally have access in the interface. So we'll play a little bit more with that in a minute, but let's see what else we've got in the template. So press Alt V to get out. Okay, so let's start from scratch again, and let's create a new project. and this time choose virtual reality here in the sample project, and we'll go with no starter content and choose the folder of your choice and name of your choice. So you create a project. I've actually already created one, so I'll use that one. And here, if you've got a Occulus or Vive, you've probably seen this already. You've got these maps which explain to you what the options are, and you've got this motion controller map, which is the one we're interested in because it's basically a map which has everything functionally ready to hit the play button using the VR preview button and launch straight into the functionality of the Vive. So let's do that real quick. So I've got my Vive on. I'm just going to click play on here, and then I've got in front of me, well, I'm holding my two controllers and I've got these two hands, and I'm able to use the thumb pads to teleport on using both controllers. And then if I go near these objects, hey, I can grab one and they're all physically enabled, and I can do lots of stuff, knock the microphone, and throw these around. So grab things and teleport, more or less. Okay, so exit of that. So now back in the scene in the UI, I'd like to point out a few things which are going to be important for us later on. So first of all, we've got this VR controller here, which is the motion controller blueprint here that we've dragged in. So we'll need to refer that back, and this is really where all the functionality of the VR is going to take place. Another thing that is quite easily missed here is I've lost it, the nav mesh bounds volume. If I press the key P on my keyboard, you're going to see this green nav mesh, that's what it's called, which is configured in such a way that it will avoid collision objects and also give me a room, sort of a spacing, maybe that's 0.5 meter around these objects, all interactively, if you want. If I was to move the collision and the box around, the nav mesh is going to adapt to that. So that's something that we will also need to take into account. I'll undo the move here. And then finally, if we go to the edit and go to project settings, we will notice here in the input tab that there's the bindings to the controllers here. We've got the action mappings and the axis mappings that we'll need to port over. So you'll see that there's quite a lot of information here under each setting, and we won't need to set that up all by ourselves manually. We're going to refer back to this one, which is already set up, and import that in our project. So I wanted you to know about this here so that we can refer back to it later. But apart from that, you can also use these files and these templates to import your projects in if you wish to do that. I'm just going to show you the situation where you would have a project and then you want to set the VR into that one, into your own project. So let's have a look at how we can do that. But before we jump into the scene and I tell you the little story, I wanted to point out this website, tomlumen.com. He is the man who has set up the template file that we have been looking at, and he's got this fantastic website and blog, and he describes in great detail the file, and there is even a video about him talking about the file and another description describing the file in great detail. So feel free to, if you want to expand your knowledge, to look at that. So now let's have a look at this Blade Runner scene. For those of you who remember the webinar on materials with substance, I created this scene which had these caustics effects. And when I went to see a Blade Runner, I've been a big fan for years. I saw these caustic effects on the walls, and I was like, I wonder how we could do this in Unreal, of course. And also, I love these great, amazing out-of-scale spaces that they've got up there. It made me think of this theoretical architect, Louis-Etienne Boulet, where the people are tiny and they've got these magnificent spaces. Anyway, so when I saw these references on the internet from the trailer, I saw this lighting. It made me think of this other project by Louis Kahn in Rochester in North America. And the interesting thing here is how the light source is hidden due to the way the light comes in through this glazing here and bounces on the wall, and you don't see the opening. So it made me think of that. So when I went back to Unreal, I built this sort of hybrid space, and with the light coming around the corner on the platform, and put the caustics in from the other project, put the water in, and I thought I was quite happy with the substance on the walls, and in the end. So hopefully we'll get to show you how you can maybe incorporate that. So little animation of what we're going to try to get to at the end, with a little bit of blueprint, a little bit of fun. Anyway, so let's have a quick look at that scene in VR, and then we'll talk about these two things, rendering and anti-aliasing. All right, so I've opened the scene, and I'm going to jump straight into VR. I've got my Vive on, and I'm holding the controllers. And we can see, so I'm in the scene, and it's looking great, really nice and sharp and really smooth. And I'm just using these buttons to kind of navigate at the moment to turn the scene around. So let's say I want to zoom out of this and start with this sort of box here, and I want to use the interface that I've got on the controllers, and I'm just going to go to the world outliner here, and I've got this box that's already selected, and I'm just going to hide it here and close that interface. And here I've got rid of my outer box, and I can start looking at this space a little bit like it is. So sorry, I keep knocking the microphone, but I keep looking at this space a little bit like it is a doll's house, or a very precious kind of model at this scale. So now I can start maybe selecting a piece of furniture and move it around. It's very playful, and a little bit like it is a doll's house, so maybe it's a bit small at this scale. And so it's kind of more of a toy at this stage rather than a real design tool, as it were. As you can see, I'm kind of struggling a little bit. It certainly takes time, and it doesn't always work at the same time. For example, at the moment I can't select my objects. So let's see, for example, if I could add a piece of furniture. So I've got my content browser here, and I will select my furniture folder. I can just sort of reposition this window here, and I'll just grab a piece of furniture which appears in front of me, and I will come and drag it. I haven't got my snap-on unfortunately, but it's worked fairly well. I'll close the window here. I can move that armchair, and if I wanted to go up a menu level and pick a different gizmo, I would pick, for example, the universal gizmo, which allows me to move and rotate the armchair here. Okay, and so I can sort of place it over there, and or maybe I'll move over there, and I would like to maybe go back to the edit mode and delete this bench and put this armchair instead. So you see the light's been baked, so I'm kind of not giving myself a big favor, but eventually we will be working like this. I think there's no doubt about it, but right now I think it's just a good idea to play around with this and keep up with the development. I'll just try one last thing. I'll go back to my windows and go to the world outliner, and I can maybe turn my caustic lights on and my spotlights here. So suddenly I've kind of turned this on and it's looking really nice and really sharp, pretty realistic, really nice sort of feeling to be in here and experience it. So here I'm sort of going back on scale 1 to 1, and everything's sort of a little bit bigger, and my navigation is definitely slower. So I can experience it like this and very quickly kind of just zoom out and see it from the top as well, and just sort of stand up. And it's I think for a client interaction, it's something that could become very exciting to if we were to collaborate, being able to collaborate in this sense with these tools. So very exciting. So that's the project in the VR mode.
Before we go on too far, I need to mention these two rather boring sounding issues: rendering forward versus deferred, and anti-aliasing MSAA versus temporal. So they're two issues which sort of go hand in hand, but as you know, we are dealing with a lot of speed issues, and let's look at that in practice. I've prepared two scenes here in order for us to compare. So this one, if you go to project settings and you go to the rendering link here, down here, you will be able to you'll see forward renderer here, and you'll have the option to tick forward shading. Now this is a small tick, but it's got a big implications. It shows here on the tooltip that to use forward shading on desktop platforms enables you to support MSAA and shader Model 5 hardware. So the bottom line is that forward shading has been developed with VR in mind, and it means things go a lot faster. So we have great advantage in using that, in ticking that. While we're here on the same page, on the same rendering page, if we scroll down, we've got the anti-aliasing method. And here I have selected MSAA, which seems to go in tandem with forward shading. So what happens to that? Let's have a look at the image. So with, I'll turn actually my caustics on, and I will put this in full screen. If I hide the gizmos here, you will see, you may perceive things are quite sharp and run very smoothly. The frame rate here is maxed out. I'm on my laptop, but it's sort of nearly 50, 60 frames a second, 50. So that's, my laptop goes as high as 60, so it's very, very good for me. In VR, the experience is extremely smooth. So this scene is performing very well, and when I compare with the same scene done with deferred shading, so if I go on my rendering tab, the forward shading isn't enabled, and we have temporal AA enabled here. So here the experience is very good as well, but you see the frame rate has dropped a lot, and the
the scene, so I'll just hide that for now. And if I put that full screen, you will see that the anti-aliasing is much softer as well. It's nowhere near quite as sharp as the other one. If I sort of flash that also. So bear in mind also that we're really concerned with is what it looks like in the VR goggles, and this is also much sharper in the VR goggles. In fact, the MSAA has been developed especially to alleviate some of the problems encountered with temporal AA, a little bit like tearing or in the goggles. So the really recommended anti-aliasing method for VR, especially for fast VR, like it was used in Robo Recall, the game. I think that's where they experimented with it very heavily. The anti-aliasing and the forward shading were developed especially for VR. So the problem is that it doesn't come without a cost, and this is the limitations that we are going to encounter. For example, here I have maxed out in the number of dynamic shadow casting lights in the scene. So you'll see that if I create a new one, it starts breaking down and I get too many overlapping shadowed movable lights. So this may come as an unpleasant surprise if you're trying to set up a scene in forward shading with a large number of lights. You can always put them on static and they will be baked in. So there's a workaround for this particular problem, but there's a lack of support for other things like screen space reflections, which I've grown very accustomed to using because they look great. So there's several limitations regarding forward shading, but I think it's a good method to get accustomed to and to understand, because it's also the method adopted for mobile rendering, and we will no doubt all become mobile one day. So I wanted you to know about this. I will carry on using this scene, the forward shading, but also show you some examples in the deferred shading version of the file, but of course it's really up to you to decide which version you're going to prefer using, and maybe both. I'd recommend trying it out. One last time, just to make sure it's clear, while I've got your attention here, it's a good idea to make this choice early on in the project, because what you really don't want to do is start with deferred renderer and swap halfway through the project to forward renderer, or the opposite, because things might become incompatible, and in my experience things will look horrible. So it's a good thing to choose very, very early on in the project. Right, so now that's clear, let's move on to how we set up the VR in our own scene. So if there's any screen grab that you should take on this presentation, is this one. It's really the step-by-step to implement in your scene one by one. So first thing we've got to do is get the information from that VR template into our scene. So that's the motion controller mapping, and then we've got to configure our nav mesh, place the motion controller, and then use the interaction on our scene. So let's have a look at that in Unreal Engine. Right, so now we have our scene, and I can go into VR mode, and it's all sort of working. I've got my wands here, and I can get out of that, and if I press play, I have somewhat control with my headset, but no wands, no functionality at all here in this scene. So it's as if it was a blank scene, really. So how do we bring in this functionality from the VR template that we saw?
Well, very simply, we're just going to add new, click add new here in the content browser, and you add feature or content pack. Here in the blueprint feature, you see you have access to all these templates, including virtual reality, and you can just click add to project. You can see also while we're here, you've got your content, starter content. So if you need to add content packs later on, you can do that through here. So I'm not going to click the add to project button because I've already done it. But once you've done that, you should have these two folders, virtual reality and virtual reality BP, in your project. And if you click on virtual reality BP, you'll see the maps that we looked at earlier and the blueprint, including the motion controller. So we've got that now done. Let's look at our list. So now we've got to import the mapping from the previous scene. So let's just open that up quickly. So I'll open my VR test and I'll pause while that's loaded. All right, that's loaded. So let's just go to project settings and check that's everything, all the configuration is here that we need. Great. So all we need to do is right click on content in the content browser and show it in Explorer there, and you will see you've got this folder content that we've just highlighted, and on top of that there's the folder called config. So here you just need to click on default input.ini, and if you open that up, you see that this is the file that will hold all the information for our configuration. So you can just right click on here and copy this file and close this, and you can even close this template file. In here, back in our own project, you click on the content here in the content browser, right click and show in Explorer, and you will have the same folder structure and this config folder above your content folder. In there you'll have a default input.ini, which I have renamed default input.ini.back, and then just paste, right click and paste your file, default input.ini that you copied from the other project. Now you probably just need to restart your Unreal editor and reload the scene, and you should have in project settings input all the action mapping and axis mapping properly configured as per the VR template. So that's great, that's done, tick, easy. Moving on to the next item is to configure the nav mesh. So for that, let's zoom out a little bit and press P. So if I press P, there is no nav mesh. So I will need to create a nav mesh in the scene. So let's click, type in NAV for nav mesh, and we want a nav mesh bounds volume. So we'll see that from the top view, and so just scale that up to roughly the size of the space, and let that overlap a little bit. Go back to perspective view, and so let's see our nav mesh in the world. So maybe we'll increase the depth of it as well. And now if I press P, you will see a green square on top of my platform here. So we're missing our bridge, and then we can put something here as well to for practical reasons today. So let's just bring in a simple cube, and you will see that if I increase the size of it, the nav mesh is going to automatically take that into consideration. So when I join it over there, it sort of joins itself. I'm going to lower that. So the nav mesh is going to cover the bridge now. I'm actually going to make this cube invisible and hidden in game. So I'll keep it visible for now, because I will duplicate it and change its size to match that hole more or less, so we can travel to it. Okay, so that's the nav mesh done, and I press P to show it, and you can see so that these items of furniture have already got their collisions enabled, and the nav mesh takes advantage of them. Back to our list, we've configured our nav mesh here, and so what we need to do is place the motion controller blueprint in the scene. So let's go back in the scene, and so here we just navigate to our virtual reality BP folder and click on the blueprint, and we've got our motion controller blueprint here. Bring that in the scene. Just going to turn that around 180 degrees and maybe move that up a little bit so that we see where we are. Right, so just a couple of things to do in here. Make sure that the auto process player here is set on player 0. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So now, let's put on the Vive and see if that works. Great, everything seems to work. I'm where I should be. I've got my two-hand controllers in front of me, and now using the thumb pads I can teleport. So you see it's not letting me teleport on top of this sofa here. Oh, I can teleport on top of the table though, and I can go where I want within the realms of the nav mesh, which won't allow me to teleport in the middle of the water. So that's great. Works very well. Very smooth. And so while we're here, let's extend that a little bit and use that BP pickup cube. So let's zoom in onto the table a little bit, and I've got the pickup cube, and I'm going to drag one into the scene, and let's, with the Alt key, copy a couple, and let's go back in VR and see if we can, very simply, so I can see the cubes over there waiting for me on the table, get close to it and grab one, and it all works. And I can sort of, they've got collision enabled, and I can throw them around and they're going to react to the so let's see if I can grab this one and bring it over the chair, and they're going to react. So here you see the collision needs to be set more properly on here. So yeah, just to see how we've extended that very easily and very simply. And finally, I'll show you a little bit how I've taken this a little bit deeper and just played around with what I had here. So just these lights, I've clicked the blueprint button here and added it as a blueprint on the lights. Just added this big square, which is a big sort of a big box, a big collision box, and that enabled me to add an event. So when something would collide with this box, I wanted to toggle the visibility of that light. So that's really very simple, and you can see these sort of orange boxes will intersect when my projectiles will be sent over to them. Same thing here with those green boxes. They're just trigger boxes, and when I've added a blueprint to them, then a sound will be played here. And we've got a few more sounds here, and a more significant change has been done to the motion controller here, because it's where the projectile is initiated from. So we'll have the trigger here from the left motion controller. Here we've got the motion controller kit, which is giving a vector world transform here, which is giving us the position and orientation of the motion controller, and then spawning that into the spawn actor function here, which takes the position of the hand and spawns a cube, the pickup cube class that we've chosen here, and plays a sound as well, that swoosh sound. So that enables us to spawn the pickup cube, and if I now go to edit the pickup cube, you will see that I've added a couple of things, like there's a sound on it, which I'm not sure I've managed to get to play yet, but there's a rotating movement, and more importantly, a projectile movement component that has been added here. So just by adding add component here, and I'm able to set an initial speed of 2000 to that projectile movement. So that's the way when this cube comes to life, it comes to life with a speed of 2000 here. So let's see how that plays in VR. Press play. So you should hear the sound coming from the scene now, which I've put into 3D. I've got my hand. So the lights turn, fireworks, turn the lights on and trigger the sound. There you go. So I hope that was fun. So finally, there we have it. This is the file finished and completed. Maybe I can tell you a little bit about these caustic lights. I've actually got a video on YouTube where I go a little bit in detail about these lights, so I'll put the links in the chat so you can check that out if you haven't already. But very simply, I've used what is called a light function here, which is very, very simple. In fact, it's just a material which has got the property, the material domain to put to light function, and that enables us to just have this emissive color and to add this animated caustic pattern here. So I'm not going to go into it now because you're probably tired and got enough information, but do check out the video. I just described these nodes. If you want me to do a step-by-step tutorial, please do let me know, and I'll do it starting from scratch. And then, so I just added them, scattered them throughout the scene, and then maybe just to look at the lighting here for the scene is just really, really simple. The way I've done these lights coming in from the ether, as it were, is very, very simple, because I use the environment color and set that to very bright yellow, maximum, and put the environment to 10. So I didn't actually have a skylight at all in this. So the GI is baked in the from the environment color, and then these lights are set. I think I have set them static, yes. So they are baked with the GI to try and give us these nice shadows underneath. So it's very simple setup, and it rendered pretty quickly. So for the light mass settings, my usual settings 0.75 and 0.75 for the level scale and lighting. I let the bounces on 1 because there's no skylight in this instance. There you go. So I just to finalize, I just wanted to make sure you've had these links. I'll put these again in the chat. Obviously the Unreal Engine documentation, plenty in virtual reality here. I wanted to reiterate again that Tom Lumen has got some great VR guides and how to getting started as well. So all the steps to get going in VR. And then Marco Romero on Facebook let me know about his great page. Plenty of very detailed information here about VR. So virtual reality Marco Romero. I've got the links in the chat. And then if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper and see how I did this projectile, this is the tutorial that I followed. Very good on the blueprint page for Unreal. Okay, and finally I wanted to talk briefly about my lighting course for those of you who wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the lighting, and where here I just really go very deep, step by step, into how to set up this scene, and here looking at the UVs and how to work with that. And then we go through 3 different very, very simple methods, but that enable you to have different results. Here it's fully baked, or we've got animations, there's the real-time GI, and then we go a little bit deeper into all the different light sources, and for each thing there's a matching sort of case study. So for example, for the interior, we've got the interior lighting, where we kind of look at each light in the space, and then more kind of a bigger space, more complicated with these sort of materials, and here even the lobby is sort of very large, and then I go very detailed into all the particular problems that we encounter working on very large. And also I want to really point out this little lecture, well, not a lecture, a presentation I do on Richard Kelly, who's a lighting designer. He's fantastic, and I really recommend looking him up. 3 elements of light so I'd give a little presentation about that, and then how to set up a swarm for network rendering. So this is very, very useful if you've got a render farm. So there you go. Any questions? We're going to go to Q&A, and so I look forward to talking to you live on there. Oh yeah, and before I forget, here's the URL. So 3dw.co.uk/Unreal. So normally 3dw.co.uk/Unreal, and that should take you just to the page where I talk a lot about more and describe some more and so on. Any questions, let me know.